For this first project, we're gonna need to cut down this piece of wood. Then I took this thing, I can never remember the name of this thing, and I beat up the board. And I grabbed a hammer and I beat up the board some more just because I like to make my things look aged. For the background side of our raised stenciled piece that we are creating here, I wanted there to be a variation of colors. So to accomplish this, we're creating a custom stain, and you can do this just by taking some acrylic paint and mixing it with water. More water than paint. It's going to give you a very faded look. You're going to make sure you pull that back, and it's going to just give your wood a hint of a color. You can do this as much as you want or as little as you want. The longer you leave this sit on here before you pull it back, the more dominant the colors will be. I just wanted to create a little bit of a contrast, something that was just different than the color of the wood on the side that we were going to do the stencil, and then we're going to blend the color of the wood in with the stain art. This is a technique I absolutely love doing on my wood pieces. It's very unique to who I am as a creator, and I also feel like it just helps take your pieces from basic wood pieces to a little bit more of, wow, look at this custom piece. This is different. I don't feel like I've seen something like that before. It just adds a little bit of something to the pieces you create. I do want to mention it is really important to make sure that your wood is dry before you go putting on your stencil. And because I'm blending in the Antique Waverly wax with this, and for some odd reason the Antique Waverly wax still seems to moist, like it's damp, people. I don't know, it's just a little bit wet. It's gonna drag into our colors. So we want to make sure that it's not dragging too much. We're blending. We don't want to overpower and overtake where we put our custom stain on the opposite side. So I'm just making sure that each section is dry as I go through the process. But you know what you do, you people? Don't let me tell you how to create your own stain art. Now, once this is dry, you're going to want to take some joint compound. This is my favorite. I always have this laying around the house. You never know when you're going to need to patch a hole somewhere. And you're going to want to mix this up with a little bit of acrylic paint, whatever color. I'm using just white acrylic paint, and this stencil I got off Amazon. I'll try and remember to link it in my Amazon store. I am absolutely horrible at that. And then you're going to want to just spread it over top of your piece. I am using a spoon, no serious tools required. Peel your stencil back and then apply whatever sealer makes you fuzzy inside. A great way to use the colored candles at Dollar Tree is to paint designs onto the front of them. One of my favorite paints to use for this I pick up at Walmart. It's by Folk Art. It is a multi-surface paint and it is really inexpensive. I've also used chalk paint before. I find that they work pretty well, but I have noticed that anytime I try to do this with just regular acrylic paints, I'm putting on some coats and it can be a little tedious when you're painting on wax. So save yourself the trouble, people, and learn from my struggle and just go ahead and use chalk paint or a multi-surface. I'm keeping this DIY super simple and just painting a nice snowy ground and some trees. If you want to seal over your piece, you go right ahead. And if you want to burn a candle that you paint, I would recommend not putting too much paint on around the top, kind of putting your decoration down at the bottom and just burn it till you get to that point. Or not burn it at all. It's so pretty. And if you struggle with hand painting, just grab a stencil, people. Wrap that sucker right on around the candle. Grab you a pouncer. Make sure it is pounced pretty dry. Now, one section I did do a little bit heavier because if you make a mistake in your pouncer or whatever you're using to apply your paint onto the candle through the stencil is a little extra. I want to show you how to fix that mistake, okay? When you're happy with your application, just remove the stencil. And if you happen to see where any bleed through came about, just grab a paintbrush, a thin one, of course, a thin one. And then you can easily, because it's still wet, and the wax material, you know, it's waxy, you will be able to just kind of follow along with the lines, trace kind of where it was, wipe that excess paint right off, and it really is hard to tell where you had any bleed through with your stencil. A little Christmas palette decor from Pinterest. I don't mind if I do, especially a little wood basket. So I grabbed some of Dollar Tree's wood palettes, 3 of them to be exact in this style and 2 in this style. And I grabbed some paint sticks, which I get from Home Depot, in case anyone's wondering. I'm gonna use some Antique Waverly Wax for our color, and I'm gonna add a little bit of water. This just helps move the Antique Waverly Wax around. I also do this with paint. I've painted hundreds of palettes at this point on this channel. I've shared many different techniques to be able to do this. If you can't spray paint them, adding water to paint or Antique Waverly Wax, it helps. But people, I still hate it. Definitely not one of my favorite things to paint or stain. I took a minute and pieced everything together with these palettes once they were dry, and then just added a little bit of hot glue to start. I find when I'm not sure the exact placement of something, that's always a good idea to start with, and then I'll come back in with some Type-On wood glue or some tacky glue, or here I'm using the Quick and Thick on a paintbrush and just going over everything, all the seams, to ensure that we get that nice long hold. I found a little snowflake stencil floating around in my stash, so I grabbed some white paint and a little paintbrush and just went in very gingerly on our piece, coloring it in. I then grabbed our paint sticks, and people, this is completely up to you. Measure them how high you would like, and then trim them down to whatever size you would like, and then just attach them. I used some more of my Type-On Quick and Thick and put everything all together, added in some greenery, and I love how rustic this little piece is. Going to need to cut 4 pieces of 1x3 down to about 20-ish inches. You can do this whatever size you want. It just depends on how big of a piece you're creating. And then we're going to beat this. We're going to beat the board, beat it up, beat it all kinds of ways, so it has all kinds of dents and wear and marks in it. And then we're going to glue the boards together. And I did cut the boards uneven, so this way it didn't look purposefully neat. It looked older and vintage-ish. I do recommend, once you have all these pieces together, putting some staples in the back of your project and then clamping all of them together and letting this dry for 24 hours. Or at least overnight, because you're going to be pressing on this project, so trying to just jump right into it after 30 minutes, it's not a good idea. Look at our beautiful stencil. I ordered this off Amazon. This is fairly big. We're just going to use half of it. And then to start out, we're going to trace the inside of the stencil very lightly. You don't have to press hard. And then we're going to water down and create our own stains. You're welcome to use regular stain if you want. I don't really like the smells, so I will water down acrylic paint, or right here we're using Antique Waverly Wax and it's watered down with a paintbrush. And we are going to paint around all the sections that we did not trace. And we're going to be very detailed with a tiny little brush, and make sure you're moving it around, because if you're not, it's going to leave clumps in little sections, and we don't want that. We want it to be very blended like the wood is stained. And by the time we're all done, the silhouette of our stencil is going to be completely traced out, leaving the actual stencil there for us to be able to see. I absolutely love creating stencil art. This is something that is so true to who I am as an artist, and I love sharing this when I get the opportunity. Plus, I like showing it for those who are not that great at drawing or painting, because you can use stencils for this instead of freehand, or you can freehand them on here if you want and draw your own pictures and then do the same technique. Once you have your stain completely colored in, like I'm going around here and just blending it in with a microfiber cloth, still using the antique Waverly wax, you're then going to erase your pencil, because you don't want anybody knowing that you traced it on there, right? So you're going to erase your pencil, and you're going to come in with your paint colors. And these colors really just depend on you, but I wanted to keep it very natural looking, also with the theme of the colors that we had going on in this video today. And we're going to use a little stippling technique. We're going to use a little finger rubbing technique, and we're going to use some blending. I do not completely color this in like a stencil when I do this. I actually leave a lot of it empty and blend in the paint with the color of the wood. So you'll have your stain, the wood color, and then you'll have the different colors of the stencil to kind of just pull in that piece, creating a really artistic piece when you're done. Once I get my stencil on there and I've kind of rubbed in as much paint as I want to be on there, this is where I decide whether I'm going to take the stencil off and then just start freehanding pieces. And yes, people, I can actually draw and do all of this without the stencil. But part of the DIY struggle is to show you guys how to create things at home for yourself and be budget friendly. So using a stencil is the easiest way to create this kind of stain art. If you're going to just stencil it on there, I wouldn't even bother doing the tracing and leaving the natural wood color. Just go right ahead and stencil right over whatever color you stained your wood. The only way that this really works best is if you kind of leave the natural wood exposed in the sections you plan on painting and using more stain and blending, so it kind of all just looks like it's blended into the wood naturally. And once this was all done off camera, I added some little extra highlights in there, and that's going to be it for this one. I was recently inspired by some friends in my community to get to building a little organizer. I need something extra to keep some craft supplies, so I had these 1x3s, and I'm going to cut them down for the sides to about 14 inches. For the shelf piece, I needed to take a trip to Home Depot. I went in their pre-cut section where they have some pieces already cut down, and they're pretty inexpensive. If you don't want to cut them down any further at home, they can do that there for you. I brought mine home and cut down 2 small shelves, used some wood glue and my nail gun, and built this little gem. And guess what? This little wired basket from Dollar Tree, it fits perfectly right on both shelves, but we're just going to use it for the top. And remember when I said I was inspired? This right here is what really caught my eye. If you're not hanging out with us over at the TDS Community Group on Facebook, you might want to stop over there when you're done watching this. I'm just saying, there's some amazing projects going on, and look, it's inspiring me inside the videos. Also, people, I want to show y'all how long it really takes me to paint something. Look at this. What if I made y'all watch this? Y'all would click off this video, wouldn't you? I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that to y'all. I painted it off camera. We are going to take some antique Waverly wax, spray down the sides of the wood so we can spread our antique Waverly wax out way quicker with a little baby wipe and just do around the edges. Look how beautiful that turned out. I did this to both sides because honestly, this wood color is going to match our napkin perfectly. And for our medium, we're going to use some Mod Podge. And to make my life a little bit easier, well, depends on how you look at it, because I gotta wait for this to dry for several hours. But since it's on a shelf and there are sides kind of blocking my ability to decoupage, I think we're going to do the iron-on method. Well, I know I'm going to do the iron-on method. We're going to make sure we have a nice healthy layer all over the top of this thing, all the way up to the edges, and then we're going to let it dry. Several hours later, it is time to take this beautiful napkin and apply it onto the top of both of our shelves. First thing we're going to need to do is remove the sneaky layers so we can just apply the top decorative layer. For this, I'm just going to tear a tiny corner and it reveals the extra layers, and I just pull it apart easily. Now it's time to bring in the iron, and I have this sucker turned all the way up. You can use whatever iron you want for this. I just usually have this sitting around me while I craft, and that's why I use that one. And don't forget your parchment paper, people. You're going to need some parchment paper. I did decide to take some scissors and cut this down. Initially, I wasn't going to. I was like, I'll just iron it, and then I will trim off the excess just by, using a little sander. Then I was like, it might just be best if I trim down the sides, because trying to get that iron around where I have the sides might be a little bit of a pain. A little tip whenever you're doing this would be to just work from one end of your napkin to the next. I wouldn't start like right on the edge, go all around the edge, go in the middle. You could end up with bubbles. I find that if I work from one end and then work my way up, if there's excess, the napkin tends to flatten out instead of bubble over and then end up with creases if I start in the middle. When I was happy with the application, grabbed my little finger sander and then I sanded down the edges by going straight down. Sometimes if you go side to side and you don't have a complete connection between the napkin and whatever you're ironing it on, it can tear the napkin sideways. So going straight down just ensures that if it didn't completely attach, you can fix it with some Mod Podge later without having a torn napkin. For the sides, I'm going to take some of my favorite texture paste. This is linked down in my Amazon affiliate link down in my description box. Just click that more button underneath this video. There is an Amazon affiliate link down there. Open that. It's a little store. It is in there if anybody is interested. This stuff is amazing. I took a stencil and I just taped it down onto the sides and then used our texture paste to create a beautiful design right on the sides of these. This piece I picked up from Goodwill. At first glance, it did not look like it was going to be much trouble. I did love the design, the cute little bird holes, adorable. I love the price even more for $3.99. And truthfully, I'm never scared of a little elbow grease. However, as I started trying to pry this metal piece off the top, I realized that sucker was kind of on there. And once I actually got it off, oh my goodness, the rust, people, the rust that was under here. Ugh. And it didn't get any better once I got the whole sucker off. I was like, oh, nobody wants to deal with cleaning this and prepping it, but here we go. To give this piece a good scrub down, I'm using Dawn dish detergent and some hot water, and I scrubbed this sucker down 3 times. If I had some Krug Kutter and my local Walmart wasn't out of Krug Kutter, I would have saturated this entire piece in it, but I had to make do with what I had and the time constraints I was under for this video. So I gave this thing a good scrub down 3 times. I let it dry, and then as you can see here, there are some it's loose paint. It's loose now. If I was going to strip it and start fresh, that'd be one thing, but we're not doing that. So a shortcut is to take a piece of sandpaper, and since there is so much paint on here, I'm using 80 grit, okay? Because I want to get these chunky bits off of here. I went around the entire piece, getting off as much excess that was just kind of loose or hanging there or rough, to try and make this prepping a little bit easier on me. I didn't film it, but when I was completely done sanding, I grabbed a microfiber cloth and went over the piece, making sure to get all of the extra crusty bits from the sanding completely off. You want to make sure you don't have any of that before you start painting, so this way you don't have anything that it's not supposed to be there in your paint. But in our case, in our bullseye primer, we are going to give this a nice primer coat. Since this piece had so much going on with it, I just feel better putting a primer on this to make sure if there's any stains that are coming through, if any of that rust is still in those holes because I didn't get it out when I was cleaning. It just makes me feel like this is all completely sealed in, protected, and prepped, ready for some paints. And people, this should go without saying, but make sure that you're wearing whatever PPE you feel is necessary whenever you're prepping pieces like this. For our paint, I'm just going to give this a layer of Rust-Oleum Ultra Matte in the Sand Dollar. When everything was all dry, I grabbed my Waverly ink chalk paint and give the roof a little paint job. I then took the same paint with a pouncer and applied a very distressed Rustic stencil right in the center. We had to put the rooftop back on, so I grabbed me some of Dollar Tree's metal lace and just kind of lined it up. They have different designs. This is the one I decided to go with, but we're gonna need to bring on in the stapler so we can apply this metal lace on top of our roof. Feel free to add some glue doing this if you want. I am confident that my staples will hold this in here for what I need it for, and that is gonna be it for this makeover. For these custom knob hangers, we're going to need 3 pieces of these 21-inch ruler sticks. They're paint sticks. Paint sticks. Seriously, don't care what that packaging says. Now, you can make these as big or small as you want, and you'll need to bring on in the drill. And you notice here, I ain't even got the battery. I am perpetrating. You've got the battery in this joint. Make sure you put a drill bit on that sucker that is large enough to drill holes that will fit your bendable gauge wire that we're going to put in here so we can hang from our cabinet knobs. And a little tip, if you're drilling this on your table, it's a good idea to have another piece of wood, or in my case, I'm over here using paint sticks because I'm loaded, underneath of what we're drilling a hole into. This is going to serve 2 purposes. 1, you're not going to put a hole through your table, hopefully. And 2, it's going to stop any split ends on the back. You can, of course, paint your pieces whatever you would like. I'm just using some antique Waverly wax here and letting that dry. Now you can either pick your stencil before or after, or your transfer before or after, completely up to you. I'm going to use this Live, Laugh, and Love. I know it's played out. Listen, it's fitting on here, and I'm inspiring you at home with the idea, okay? You remix this into what works for you. A little tip if you're nervous about your stencil game is to cover up whatever sections of the stencil you don't plan on putting on the piece that you're stenciling. So I just did this as an example for the first one, so this way you could see how super easy it is putting painter's tape over the little word right over top of the love. The bottom section wasn't going to interfere with anything that we were stenciling, so I didn't bother. I'm often asked when I'm stenciling if it matters if I use a paintbrush, if I use a stencil brush, if I use a makeup sponge, a pouncer, a regular sponge. Honestly, people, I personally don't feel it matters much. What does matter is your onload and offload method, and that is how much paint you are keeping on whatever you're using to transfer the stencil onto here. If you have an overloaded amount of paint on your pouncer or your brush, it is going to most likely smoosh underneath the stencil. So it's a good idea to make sure the pouncer, in this case, is pretty dry before you start tappity tap tap tapping that sucker on top the stencil. And if you're interested in more stencil tips, I usually keep my how to stencil video down in the description box. Just click that more button underneath the video when you're done watching this one. You can use whatever type of bendable gauge wire that you would like. I honestly have no idea where I purchased this, how long I've had it. It's been in my stash forever. I am finally down to the bare end of it. You're going to want to cut a piece that is just large enough that you can hang this from the knob. There are a couple different ways that you can obviously bend this to have a little design at the end if you would like, or just completely bend it around the back. It's entirely up to you, but I'm going to show you what I do here, and you can take it or leave it with your projects. Once I have it bent in all the right sections, I like to leave just enough on the end so I can create a little pigtail spiral with a pair of needle nose pliers. Obviously, the more you leave through the hole, the more of a spiral you'll get, but on these I just wanted a cute little piece, and it does take a little bit of hand grip strength, so just keep that in mind whenever you're creating these. When you're happy with them, you can seal over them if you'd like and hang them on your cabinet knobs. Grabbed several of these large cutting boards at Dollar Tree. They were only $3. They look amazing on their own, but we're gonna decoupage this one in a very unique way. Normally I'd paint over this gem and call it a day, but we're gonna actually sand off the design. That's right, this is going to just sand right on off of here. It's going to take a little bit of elbow grease, and it started making a bit of a mess. So, you know, I retreated to the patio. And just in case you're wondering, I'm using 120 grit. The lower grit on the sandpaper, the more coarse it is. The higher grit, the smoother it is. The more coarse it is, gives you the ability to really knock off any print like this. And people, since it was 120 grit, this was a little rough, you know what I'm saying? But I had to be careful because guess what? This is not solid wood. It's MDF, okay? Check out the back, all right? This is a huge indicator, not solid wood, just the top. So if we would have sanded it down too far, we wouldn't have that beautiful wood on there. And now to make it nice and smooth, I'm gonna take this 800 grit sandpaper and just wrap it around my little finger sander, and we're gonna go over this to make it smooth like butter for us to make a brand new DIY out of. We are finally at the good part. Sometimes prepping is like such a pain in the booty. Oh, look at that, I forgot something. And of course, I continue to forget that Dollar Tree has been stepping up their game with attaching things. So here I am, because they have put these staples in this sucker, trying to pry the twine off of here by any means necessary. Those suckers were in there. But in all seriousness, it's a good thing that they're, you know, putting their stuff together better. Here is one of the beautiful napkins that we're going to be using to decoupage onto this piece. And one thing I really love about this napkin is each square has a different design on the background. It's like the same front background, you feel me? But the back has a different design. And since I'm asked constantly about layering and matching napkins, this is the second napkin we're going to use on here. We're going to tear both of these apart, put them together on our beautiful cutting board. And this napkin has the same exact design on 4 squares. To get us started, we are going to tear a little corner here to reveal the sneaky layers and rip them suckers right on off, so we just have our top decorative layer. And then we are going to use a little bit of water on a paintbrush to really give us a nice specific design. You can tear your napkin. I love doing that as well. But whenever you're doing details and you're using things like tissue paper or a napkin, since they're super thin, water can help guide you to get a precise design. Just make sure when you're using a napkin specifically, you wait for the ends to dry, that you have water on. If you do not, while you're trying to apply that with the Mod Podge or whatever you're using as your medium, it's possible that sucker is going to rip or cause issues. So, you know, wait 10-15 minutes, make sure all your little edges are dry from the water. To apply our napkins, we're going to use some cling wrap, and this is just the Great Value brand. It's a knockoff. It isn't even the actual name brand. And we're going to be using some sponges. I use these all the time and get asked all the time, what sponges do I use? These exact ones. And we don't even need a whole sponge, because it's been my experience that if I use the whole sponge, it actually gets in the way. So I'll cut them in half and just use half the sponge. And people, a little tip, after about 7 to 10 uses, this is going to get a little crusty musty. I will cut these up so I can use them for stencils and textured effects. Just a little tip, you know, waste not, want not. And we are going to be using some Mod Podge and fan brush to apply our napkin. It's my favorite thing to actually use as an applicator whenever I'm doing napkin decoupage DIYs. There are a lot of ways you can create decoupage art, and as a crafter, a DIYer, or an artist, I like to believe that we all find what works for us through one means or another, whether it's school, a knack for it, YouTube. And really, I truly believe that there's no right or wrong way to go about it. Just create something that you love, and as long as it makes you happy, that's all that matters. It doesn't have to be perfect. Whenever it comes to decoupage, I like to believe less is more, because napkins are super easy to destroy. Super easy. So usually I will place my napkin down in one section, and I'll either start at the top, the bottom, the side, the middle, whatever works for me at that time, depending on the project. And I will go little by little, section by section, applying a small amount of Mod Podge, using my sponge to press it down, because the Mod Podge seeps up through the napkin. The sponge, since it's dry, it's grabbing that, and then you can take your cling wrap and go over it, smoothing it out. And before I get the iron-on method people of the world talking about how that is the best way to get the most wrinkle-free application, you are so right. It absolutely is. But I talk about this a lot in my content. Doing it this way is quickest for me because I have to make content for you. The iron-on method requires drying and waiting and waiting. With this, since I'm applying such a thin layer, it dries really quickly and I can continue making whatever I'm DIYing. There are a couple ways you can go about layering napkins. For this particular project, I really wanted that cascade of hydrangeas that is going upwards to kind of meet right underneath of our little yellow Tweety bird that we have up here. So I just took some more water on a little paintbrush and just kind of trimmed it in such a way that it blended together. Now you might be asking yourself, Brandy, why didn't you just paint the background and then apply your napkins? Well, there's a couple ways you can, like I said, decoupage, and I wanted the wood background to kind of blend into the napkins to make these look like they just went on the board. And keep in mind, whenever you're decoupaging a napkin or tissue paper and it's really thin, you can see whatever the background is. It'll be fairly translucent. So if you pick the color of your background that is sort of similar to your wood grain, it'll look really flawless. And this goes without saying that if you iron it on, it's going to be even more flawless. Okay. Once I was happy with the application of the napkins, I decided to take some more cling wrap and just kind of go over. There were some little sections where I got a little extra with the Mod Podge and really just wanted to kind of smoosh it out. And the cling wrap helps accomplish that. I let this dry for about 20 to 30 minutes, but if I'm recommending getting to the next part to you, I would say wait a couple hours, okay? Don't be a rebel like me. Be patient. It's not easy. We're now going to take some of this distressing texture paste and put some stencils on here. But I also want to add a little bit of color because I want everything to kind of match our napkins. So I'm taking a little, bowl here and taking just a tiny bit with my tool. And you don't have to use one of these tools. I've showed it before. You can use a spoon, whatever. It doesn't have to be a fancy schmancy little plastic tool that costs like 99 cents from Ross in a little pack of like mixed things. Don't let me perpetrate like, I'm not fancy, y'all. I'm not, okay? I'm wing it and get it done. Now, I just mixed some colors together until I got 3 that made sense to me with the napkin colors and that I felt I could also blend to get a little bit more colors. You want to make sure that before you do anything like this, you want to try and tape it down. So I used some painter's tape and then held my pointer finger on my left hand at the top of where I wanted it to start and then worked my way down. And I used primarily this color and took some of the other colors and smooshed it in there to give us a little bit of variety. I felt like it matched the hydrangeas, it matched some of the red and the truck, or it's a truck, it's a car. And it just kind of blended on down with our little stencil here. And ooh, look how pretty. And it dried like that. It really did. It dried like, well, you'll see in just a second. I decided to take some butterflies because we had some butterflies in one of our little napkins. And I had different stencils with different butterflies. And since I didn't want to put anything on the handle part, I wanted to actually leave the handle as a whole. I put them going up the handle in different colors. And because I cannot leave well enough alone, I grabbed some stamps. Some were Dollar Tree stamps, some were some off Amazon I had, and just put some in different little sections. Allow this to dry a day and then put whatever sealer you want to put over this. Next time you're in Dollar Tree around the holiday season, head on over and grab some of these large wood ornament blanks. We're going to use these to create some amazing wall decor accents, and I'm going to be using not 1, not 2, but 3 of these for that. I'm picking Admiral Blue for my color scheme for these beautiful ornaments. By all means, use whatever color best fits your decor style this season. I only put 1 coat on these, and then I allowed them to completely dry. If you want to do more than 1 coat, by all means, you can right ahead. I was happy with these just as they were. Next, I'm grabbing some large stencils I had in my stash that I picked up from Amazon quite some time ago. I love damask and ornate things, and I felt like these would be perfect right on the front of these. You can paint your stencil in if you want. I'm just going to take some of my homemade texture paste. This is just a mixture of calcium carbonate, baking soda, and glue. Usually I'm able to mix up a batch and it stays for about 3 to 5 days. And people don't even try to ask me about the ratios, okay? Because I mix with love. Listen, just make some stuff in a bowl and, cross your fingers and start spreading it on your ornament. Look how pretty. I used 1 stencil design on 1 of the ornaments and then the same on 2. And I made sure, obviously that they matched. You could color your texture paste if you want, or if you're painting, you can use obviously whatever color paint you would like for this. Whenever I'm doing this, I like to let this sit several hours, at least 3 to 4. And a good way that I can tell if it's done is I will take my fingernail and I will scratch over the surface. If there's no nail indents, then it's done. And you can either leave it as it is or put whatever kind of sealer you would like over it. You can leave your ornaments as is, but we're going to jazz ours up just a smidge and add some of this floral metal ribbon that you can pick up from Dollar Tree. If you don't see this at Dollar Tree and you have a Hobby Lobby local to you, they also sell metal lace or metal ribbon. You can pick it up from there as well. I use this to put around where our hangers kind of go because I'm not adding a hanger on the top of it. This is just going to be our added accent on here. And I just push them around and squeeze them tight around the back, and then it was time to bring on in the stapler. I'm gonna take this and just pop a staple in to each side just to ensure that this doesn't come off. I personally want these to be kind of flat up against the wall, so I'm just using a little bit of glue, a little piece of cardboard with twine for the hanger on the back. If you wanted to use the holes that were in the top, you go right ahead and do that. I love the way they look just like this. Quick and easy wall decor piece, I grabbed one of Dollar Tree's large DIY star signs. In one of these little nesting boxes, I'm going to just take some black paint and give both of them a nice coat. You can absolutely use whatever color you would like for yours. Once they were both completely dry, I grabbed a large stencil and placed it right over top of the whole star. You can use paint if you would like, but I'm going to take some of my handmade texture paste and give this a nice coat. You can also mix in acrylic paint whenever you're doing texture, give it a nice color. I happen to like it just the way that it is for this project. When you're all done with that, peel it right on off and then allow this to dry for a few hours. I'm using Titebond Quick and Thick to put a nice little layer on the back of our box that we're attaching to the star, and then it was time to bring on in the stapler. I attached the box and this flipped it upside down and, was mindful, making sure that I was putting the staples in the right spot. For the shelf portion, I wanted to just use one of Dollar Tree's LED candles. Lately, I have been in love with adding TDS dry rub-on transfers onto candles. Been adding them onto the LED ones, adding them onto the regular ones. I've just been really loving popping different things onto candles. Now, keep in mind, transfers are not meant to go on wax, so it does take a little bit of elbow grease, but with some patience, usually the LED candles I find are the easiest to plop them onto, and I love how they just add a little something extra into your decor. Absolutely love how this whole piece turned out. I found these really unique metal trays that had these designs on them at Goodwill. I picked up a couple of them, but I'm only going to use one for this project. They were $2.99 each, and as much as I love the design on there, let's say goodbye to it. Moving on, we're going to use this little wood cup I had in my stash I picked up quite some time ago from another thrifting adventure, and grab some of my DIY paint in the letterpress gray color and grab a pouncer, do a little tappity tap 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 all over both pieces. This color is so cool because it gives like a stone effect. Once it was dry, I picked out a small stencil so we could create a raised 3D effect right on the center of this riser. And I made sure to do this prior to attaching the cup on the bottom as our base. For the texture mixture, I just used some calcium carbonate, baking soda, and a little bit of glue, mixed it together with some love, and I usually get a really amazing paste to be able to create these really cool 3D looks. I love how these turn out using some stencils. Unfortunately, I was out of my favorite Gorilla Glue gel, and I always got some E6000 laying around because I don't use it that often. Not a huge fan of the smell of stuff, but I know it works. So that's what I use to attach these two pieces together. Absolutely love how this turned out. I will say, this is not practical to put heavy things around the edges. It's more decorative. So if you're going to recreate a piece like this and use the type of centered base for your stand, keep that in mind. For this glass hanging wall decor, we're going to be using two small jars we're going to be upcycling and this large wood plank from Dollar Tree. Now I decided that I wanted to put a stencil on here, so I just grabbed one of my ornate stencils that I had in my stash and I marked it to figure out kind of where the center of our large wood plank is. You can skip this part if you would like, but I just wanted to pop a stencil in here. Then I'm marking exactly where I want to place these jars. I want to paint the glass jars, so I'm going to mix these two together to get a really beautiful cream color. I set those off to the side to dry and grabbed my antique Waverly wax and a baby wipe to give our large wood plank a nice little tint of brown. You can apply as many colors as you would like or different colors. I wanted to just do a real light neutral, and I love how antique Waverly wax dries. I like to use this manipulative wire. You can easily bend this stuff, okay? It's a thick gauge wire. You can get it off Amazon. You could get it at Michael's. You know, they use it like for crafts. And I like to kind of bend it around our glass pieces in its little nooks and then cut it down to size with some wire cutters. This way we can attach it onto different things and we know that our glass piece is going to be secure. You could also use zip ties. They give a nice secure hold as well whenever you're working with glass. This is just what I went with and what I'm familiar with, and I know this works really well, so I rolled on with it. I took my time wrapping the twine around the gauge wire as well. This way it just ensures that, you know, it's not going to shift or go anywhere. Now that we're all done with that, it is time to bring on in the drill. We need to make sure that we have a drill bit on our drill that is larger than the wire so we can put holes in our board that we marked earlier. When I was all done drilling the holes, I grabbed the stencil that we marked earlier and some of my homemade texture paste and put a nice little design right on the center of this board. You could absolutely put whatever you would like on the center of this board or leave it completely blank. This is just what I decided to roll on with. When that was dry, I put our little glass jars into place, and instead of doing anything fancy schmancy to the wire, I literally just bent them like this and I left it. So if we want to change it out, it's super easy to do. Dollar Tree smaller mason jars for this lantern decor piece. We're not going to need the top, so we can go ahead and pop that off. And we're already off to a great start. Use any planter you would like for this part. I happen to have one of these square galvanized pieces, and I'm going to be using that. I grabbed it from Dollar Tree, as well as one of these Dollar Tree candle holders. Now, I've already painted this up and I have a transfer on it. Mind all of it, okay? Because we're not going to see it. We're just using it to be able to set our mason jar lantern on top of as its little stool. Floral foam would do the trick as well. To create the lantern look, we're gonna need one of these LED hanging lamps from Dollar Tree. I love how these fit perfectly right into the top of these mason jars, and they have the little button on the top so they're easy to turn on and off. I want to add a little something something onto the mason jar, so I grabbed one of these stencils that I picked up off Amazon. You can get them in a pack. I even think I have some down in my Amazon affiliate link in the description box. I'm trimming it down to the size that I need, and I'm gonna grab some painter's tape and cut a whole bunch of little sections, because as you can imagine, it is not going to stay on here easily. So we're going to need to make sure that we're taping this down as much as possible, because it is a plastic stencil. You can obviously create your own so this way they stick on here, and that would probably work better, but I'm a rebel and we're gonna use this plastic one. I know this multi-surface paint sticks amazingly to glass, so I'm just gonna go ahead and use that. And I've had a lot of people say that they can't stencil. And a little tip, I do have a how-to stencil video. I can link that down below. A little tip, it doesn't matter what you use to apply your paint. I want you to understand the best way to stencil is to make sure you offload most of your paint to where whatever you're using, whether it's a paintbrush, whether it's a sponge, it is practically dry. If it is almost dry and there is no paint, you're not going to suffer from all that smushing underneath of the stencil, creating a lot of bleed through. Since the jar is circular, I'm also placing my finger very gingerly in different sections that are popping up on the stencil. So this way I make sure that as I'm applying my little pouncer, that the paint is going right over the stencil and not bleeding through. Also, it's a good idea to always remember that you want to keep your glass clean whenever you're working with it. You'll notice here I don't have gloves or anything like that, and I didn't clean my glass, and that's because I'm mostly just keeping the pieces for me and creating them for the ideas for you for the video. You want to make sure if you're doing this at home, you keep your glass clean and you wear gloves so you don't get any of those finger oils onto the glass underneath your paints. A lot of tappity, and later we have a beautiful stencil on our mason jar. I am shoving some greenery in our galvanized bucket piece. Pop whatever you would like in here to finish it up. Also glue whatever you want to glue down. Use your E6000, your Gorilla Glue Gel. I have things just sitting in here for staging purposes for the video to introduce the idea to you at home. And I hope you love it as much as I do. So many different ways you can use this idea, and I'm going to be sharing tips and tricks of the basics. One of my favorite ways to do this is to take a piece of wood and mix multiple colors. This is very beginner basic and really helps you get a feel for how creating your own stain soaks into the wood and how it dries lighter than what it usually looks, as well as getting the hang of blending. One of my favorite ways to end with these pieces is to make it look like it's wood. So I like to stain the wood and blend it in with the colors. And we're going to be doing all of that right now. I want you to keep in mind this technique you can actually use on furniture as well. I have done this on furniture pieces, on tabletops. I've done this on larger wall pieces, and you can put vinyls over them. It's absolutely beautiful depending on the way that you want to create this. Just takes a little bit of patience. We're going to be using these 3 colors today, and they are acrylic. I like using acrylic paints. They're easy to mix with water and give a really cool stain look. I almost never measure. I usually wing, but for the sake of the video today, we are going to measure. So when you do this at home, you have all the tips and tricks that you need to be able to recreate it. We're gonna start off by putting our little squirts in. And I'm probably using about a teaspoon of paint in there. And I'm gonna do that for each 1, about a teaspoon. And then this pretty color, about a teaspoon. There we go. I don't have a measuring cup down here in the craft cave, but what I do have is a little bottle of water I keep to refill my little spray bottle. So you'll see that it is right underneath this blue line, and we're not going to use a whole bunch. Probably about a 1/4 cup in each one of these. I'm just going to kind of eyeball that. Use whatever you want to mix it up. I just had a dowel laying around here, and just spend about 30 seconds stirring it up till you don't see any clumpy bits of that acrylic paint laying around. Tools for the trade here are going to be paintbrushes and napkins, okay? Paintbrush to apply the stain and napkin to wipe it back. Good thing to know is that the longer you allow this to sit on here, the darker the color is going to be. But also be mindful, because you will have striations, and we want this to be blended. Because this is the first layer, I'm going to leave it sit on here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about with the striations. This is soaking in, and as it's soaking in, you can see the line where the paint ends. Well, our stain, our DIY stain. And you might ask, Brandy, why aren't we doing this with just a paint? Well, the paint is going to cover over the wood grains. And I don't want to cover over the wood grains. I want to just keep the wood grains, create a stain, and allow beautiful colors to pop through on our wood, giving it an entirely different look. If you leave your paint sitting there too long, this is what's going to happen. When you go to wipe it back, you can see the lines. So you want to keep that in mind. Even if I remove the whole thing, what can you see? The end lines, okay? So that is going to make your stain look wonky. You don't want to do that. What you can do instead is a heavier layer of paint. Like if you want it to get on here, have it heavy. And then pull it. And then do the same thing in the same spot. It's going to take you a couple times, but you're not going to have those harsh lines. Instead, you can see the color starting to come up. So the longer you leave it on here, like if you want to leave it on for a couple seconds, the deeper this color is going to get, which is fine. Leave it on for a couple seconds, pull it back. And each time you do it, leave it on for a couple seconds, the color is going to get deeper. Pull it back. This is preventing those harsh lines, and instead it's creating a blend. So the longer you leave it on, the deeper your color gets. But be mindful leaving it on too long, because you will then get these awkward lines in there that don't actually blend in with the wood grains. If you're just doing one color, obviously this doesn't matter, but I like to live on the edge, and we're going to do several colors, and I'm never really sure how I want this to go until it starts happening. I will also tell you that I think it's a good idea whenever you're doing this to go with the grain of the wood. Just looks natural to me when you're doing stain art like this. The idea is to make it look very natural with your wood piece. Do not want to add the Waverly wax, don't. You don't have to. This is just something I like to do. It, to me, gives it just a hint of a, oh my gosh, is that actually wood? Or You know what I mean? Like, is that made like that, or was it created like that? And try and be mindful as you're doing it to really rub across so you don't have any harsh spots of just stopping. So if I wouldn't have started rubbing that completely towards the edge, there would have been a little stoppage there instead of some blending. If you want to stop here, by all means, you go right ahead. This is completely dry. It's the next day. I'm not going to stop here. We're going to pop a raised stencil on top of this sucker. There are a bunch of different ways you can create a raised stencil. I used to use joint compound, and I still do on certain pieces depending upon what I'm doing. One of my recent favorite finds is Tim Holtz texture paste. It is non-toxic. It does not have a smell to it. It dries really well. And I do like to seal over my pieces. Once this is completely dry, I'll usually wait a day or two to be able to do that. You want to tape down your stencil so this way it doesn't move, and then get to applying. This little tag is one of my favorite new finds at Dollar Tree, and I love this Tim Holtz paste. So we're going to create a little raised design on here. And people, in the event you feel like you need fancy tools for stuff like this, you don't. Check this out. I'm just using a little plastic spoon. Now I'm going to change the color here. So we're going to take some black acrylic paint, give it a little squirt, and then smoosh it around until our paste is the color of the paint. And then grab your stencil, people. Well, I grabbed two. I grabbed some bees and some flowers. They're kind of in this season. Well, they were in last year too, but I thought this stencil was cute, and we're just gonna roll on with it. If you're not a bee fan, grab whatever you want, okay? Don't let me, stunt your creativity. And yes, you've seen me trimming the stencil down. You don't have to do this. You can keep yours whole. I just trim mine down. I'll keep them in a little container, rinse them off whenever I need them. You know what I mean? You do you. But cutting them down lets me fit them on this little piece just perfectly, and then I just smooshed in the mixture around. I do recommend taping this down. Don't be a rebel like me and just hold it on there. Messes happen and mistakes are definitely made. I personally just wanted to try it out because this paste is fairly new to me and I love it. So, I need to be able to give you guys my real opinion, and I can't do that if I don't try different things. So I'm taking two different colors, a little peach here and a yellow, and mixing them up to give us the color for our little flower. Even though I didn't put any yellow on our bee, I thought it would be nice to kind of have a little pop of yellow on here outside of the bee, giving a really nice contrast. And then I just took a little gem that was, on one of my little sticker things from Dollar Tree, plopped it in the center here, and I did decide to put a little bit of highlights around the flower using a dotting tool. I just made little dots and made them smaller as we went along, and decided to add in one more little flower up in the corner. This turned out so flippin' cute. This is actually the top of an old child's dresser that I flipped a while back. It was holding a mirror. It is in bad shape. I'm gonna fix it. And we're gonna turn it into a shelf by using this 1x8. I started out just by placing this on top of the board, and I'm gonna give it about an extra 3 inches on each side. Not getting too wild, just extra 3 inches. And I've had a lot of questions about the miter saw that I use in my inbox, emails. I use this one that slides out at 7 inches, people. It runs about $189 on sale at Home Depot, and I love it because I can, move it around and make it do what I want it to do. So if you're watching and you're one of those and you're wondering, and I've even showed it in some of my browsing videos when I go to Home Depot because I get a lot of questions about what I use. So I hope that helps. Before I attach this onto our shelf, I gotta wood glue it up and I gotta tighten things up because it is just wonky and unstable, and I'm just going ham with the wood glue. So forgive me. Then I clamped this on down and I left it to dry for 24 hours. There was a hole in here and I thought, let's put a dowel in there in case somebody wants to put this in the bathroom or in the kitchen. You could hang a little decorative towel or something on this piece. So I took some wood glue, I shoved the dowel on through the little hole, and I also took some wood filler and went on the ends of the hole to kind of seal it in and let this dry as well. I was really going to just kind of fill both sides up with the wood filler, and I'm like, nah, we could kind of make a little, you know, make a little hand piece. I don't know. What would you guys have done? Would you have left it, or do you think that adding the dowel was a good idea? Anyhow, more of the black spray paint, okay? Black spray paint on, around, and everywhere. I just wanted this one to kind of have options. I'm using the same Hurricane Gray paint, and I'm only doing one coat of this, and not even a thick coat, like just a coat, because I'm coming back in with a whitewash over it, and then I'm going to just pull it back. All this is some water and some Waverly's plaster paint, chalk paint, and that's it. And I'm just wiping it back. Once this was dry, then it is time to bring on in our mix of joint compound and more plaster paint. I then took our stencil and laid it on down the long arm pieces at the bottom of our shelf, smoothed it on out, and then peeled it on back. And these just came out so beautiful. They added a little something something to the shelf, especially once we add our distressing. Now I need to create hangers on the back here so we can hang our shelf on the wall. So I'm using these little hammer tooth hangers. They're super easy to use. Just make sure that you try not to have them too crooked. I am definitely guilty of that. I'm then taking our sandpaper, once again wrapping it around our little block, and we are going to go ham all over this little gem and just sand it on out, creating a beautiful distressed look. It's not every day you run into a piece like this, and when you do, and you love farmhouse like I do, you pick it up because you need to do something to it. Now there was a little bit of staining on it. I was worried I was gonna have to put a primer, but once I cleaned the piece off, these wiped right off, so no primer was necessary. Now I did sand and prep the piece off camera. You're welcome, no thanks necessary, I know. We're gonna take the Waverly white chalk paint and we're gonna paint over this piece that someone painted on here. I know, a moment of silence. Okay, now we're going to take this black Craftsmart premium chalky acrylic paint and do the roof. I usually never do traditional farmhouse, and I just had to with this piece. Before we put the stencil on here, I'm taking an 800 grit piece of sandpaper just to get any extra lumpy bumpies off so it's nice and smooth. Also, this is going to give our final product a nice buttery looking finish when we put our sealer on top of everything. I'm taking a microfiber cloth to go over just to make sure I get any crusty bits off of our project. And then we're gonna bring in the sponge. Now I'm gonna clip the top of this because I want it kind of flat. I didn't have any circle ones around. We're being cheap, so we're improvising. I'm using this beautiful stencil I picked up at Ross for like $3.99. Are you sleeping on Ross craft section? I think I plugged my brows with Brandy's already, but crafting section at Ross is banging for little deals like this. And I could not wait to use the stencil. The second I seen this piece, I was like, I already know what I'm doing with it. I'm lightly stippling this one here, stippling. I say that wrong all the time. You do you if you want to do it heavy. I like this really worn look, and this is exactly how I wanted this to turn out. It's absolutely stunning. And on the top, I added a little bit of florals, and that's it for this one. using Dixie Belle's White Lightning Cleaner, and I do put mine in a spray bottle. They do not recommend that, but it works out just fine for me. I saved you the cleaning, you're welcome. And I think this piece is going to bleed, so I did also put a layer of Dixie Belle Balsa on here, and I'm using Waverly's Lavender. That's it, just Waverly's Lavender. And I'm going to coat the whole thing. This did take 2 coats, not too bad, you know what I mean, not too bad. Didn't take long to dry because I used my little heat gun. And then we're going to need to grab us some joint compound, a stencil, and whatever color paint you want to do, because we're going to create a raised stencil. Who's shocked? This is like my signature thing. Are you shocked? If you're new, don't be shocked. Get used to it. This is what I do. Okay, so joint compound, I'm using Waverly's White, and we're just mixing it together so it's all creamy. A little bit of ASMR right there for you. Now, you can do this however you want. I have wrung this many times and used a plastic spoon. Just make sure your stencil is pressed down in the exact spot you are spreading out your mixture. This is not a tedious and time consuming project. It takes just a couple minutes. Just be mindful and move your hand as you go for a larger piece. If it's a small piece, just make sure you're pressing properly. This is also in real time. I did not speed any of this up, so this way you could see, well, I mean, I did fade as I move forward, but as you're seeing it, that's actually how I'm doing it. It's not sped up the process. Are you guys picking up what I'm putting down? Anyhow, let's move on. So when you get to the point where you're completely done, you're welcome to go back over and check, make sure you didn't miss anything. And if you have some smooshes and you want to fix them, use your finger, or you could use a dotting pen, a toothpick, and go back and make some adjustments. It was not necessary for this. And yes, you can use your heat gun to dry this up quicker. I like to do that. And I'm going to take some Rust-Oleum metallic accents. I recently had a subscriber, Miss Jax, talk about mixing some, shinies and metallics and stuff like that. I'm like, I got this stuff. So let's use this on a project. So I took this and rubbed it all around the edges and then came back in over the top of the project. This stuff dries super quick, so make sure you're working quickly. It also, the more you use, the heavier of a metallic it is. I was trying to leave some gaps and keep it fairly thin. Now, I like to use kind of when I'm putting florals on something, a base. So I was trying to use this tumbling block, and then I'm dropping the tumbling block everywhere. And I'm like, I'm gonna get crusty bit fingers again, because this Gorilla Glue gel means serious business. So I'm like, oh, let's hurry up and just get this glued on here before I mess my whole hand up. If this happens to you, quickly take a paper towel or something and make sure that you get up the spots where it was touching, because you don't want to go back, and which I've done before, and put my hand in it, and then I had like my table sticking to me. It was a mess. Anyhow, let's move on with the project. I want my center flower to stick up a little bit, so I'm putting this base, you could use popsicle stick as a base too. I just like doing this because I feel like it gives more of a sturdier attachment when I'm doing florals, and it also allows me to kind of, tier them a little bit. I'm taking some solo wood flowers and I'm using the hot glue and the Gorilla Glue. This way I know them suckers are not going anywhere. Plus I always think they have a very high-end look to them. I thought will be perfect for this wall planter. I am just going to keep this nice and rustic and use some antique Waverly wax. I'm going to apply this with a baby wipe, and I'm going to apply it all over the entire piece of wood. Especially if you're going to be selling pieces like this, it's a good thing to make sure you're also doing the back. Somebody's going to peek behind there, so just make sure you get that side done as well. These are some cleaned out Campbell soup cans. We're going to give these a nice coat of paint, and then we're going to attach them to our large piece of wood. Keep in mind, whenever you're painting on different materials, you always want to check the paint that you're going to use and make sure it's going to adhere to that surface. I'm using DIY's clay base here. A good multi-surface or chalk paint also works good with this material. I ended up leaving some of the metal shining through, so these were a little rustic. I want to use Dollar Tree's metal lace to attach these. I started off by measuring out the lace, wrapping it around the can, so I made sure to give myself enough excess to attach it onto our piece of wood. Now you could do that 2 times, but I decided to just lay the piece I already cut down and measure another piece out and cut it. Now it's time for us to bring in the stapler. I want to make sure that our lace stays on our piece of wood, and this stapler is gonna ensure that that happens. Really? Really? Got to be kidding me every single time. At some point, I'm going to learn my lesson and check that stapler before I start stapling. The problem is I always feel like I put a ton in there to start with, and I got, several videos before I got to worry about it. However, that never seems to work out. Now you're probably wondering, Brandy, how the hell are you going to staple underneath that can? Well, this is just the trick. I am going to leave just enough space for that can to shimmy itself inside of the metal lace. So I see how I'm like kind of, you gotta mess with it, okay? Because if you cut it too big, it's gonna slide right on through. That probably came out wrong. I mean, get your metal lace on there however you need to get it on there. This worked out for me. I stapled one side, measured, stapled the other side, and then we are just shimmying our little can right on down. There were some smudges in the paint. No big deal. I just took the little sponge brush that I was using, went right over the little sections, and nobody's gonna know but me. You can leave your piece plain. I love using women in my art. I think they're absolutely beautiful and can just add something to anything you're DIYing. So we're gonna take this stencil that I have and use a little bit of Tim Holtz Distress Texture Paste, and we're going to put a thin layer over this. And then I'm going to also take some sections of this and pop around in different areas on our board just to enhance the whole piece. Keep in mind, if you don't have any fancy schmancy tools to spread out your texture paste, it's no big deal. I have used a plastic spoon before. Use what you have on hand, just make sure it's a nice flat piece. You could even use a popsicle stick. Also ensuring that your piece is taped down to whatever you're applying this on will stop from bleed through underneath your stencil. I personally recommend waiting at least 24 hours before sealing over this piece. And a great idea would be to seal it with some Rust-Oleum Clear Matte spray paint. This way you can just kind of spray it over your metal lace and the cans, kind of get a nice seal on everything, especially if you plan on reselling this piece. And then once it's all dry, pop in your florals. If you want to put some real florals in here, just take a drill gun and screw in some holes in the set of wonky roof houses. We're going to cut the tops completely uneven. I used a 31.6 angle on the miter saw in case you're interested, and I just cut them both different sizes. Obviously, cut your roofs however you want. Normally with common boards, you should sand them down. They can be a little bit rough, but these were pretty smooth, so I was really comfortable just grabbing some antique Waverly wax and giving these a nice thin coat. I used a little bit of water and a paper towel just to stain these on up, and then to speed up the process, I grabbed the heat gun to help me move on to our next part, which is one of my favorite parts, stenciling. I love to stencil. I grabbed these off Amazon. I will try and have these linked down in my affiliate link if you're interested in grabbing these cute little stencils. And we're going to use 2 different designs along with this Tim Holtz texture paste that is also down in my affiliate link. You can leave the texture paste the color it is or grab some paint like I am right here. We're going to mix this up and make it a little vanilla. I'm also going to take this decorative trim and create a little rooftop. You can pick these up from Home Depot in this little section right here, and you get 4 foot of this, which I think is a really good deal for $3.98. To make my life a little bit easier, I decided to just paint it before I started measuring and cutting it on up. I let that dry and I painted it the same vanilla color we are changing our texture paste to, and now it's time to bring in the miter shears. That's one thing I love about these little trim pieces that you can pick up from Home Depot is they're super easy to cut with the miter shears. Not everything is, okay? Shocker, but it's not. So the best advice that I can give you whenever you are cutting trim is to leave a little extra, okay? Leave a little extra, leave room for error, people, leave room for error. It has been my experience that, you know, if you leave a little extra, it's always easy to get rid of some, but if you cut it too short, you can't create some, you know what I mean? You can't create some. Once I had these at the size that I was happy with, I then put them right at the tip of the roof and marked them so we could create a beveled cut, which is basically just a slant cut like this. You're going to place the little piece of trim where you have it marked in your miter shears. Hold it very steadily, people. Hold it very steadily. We don't want to lose no digits. I am not responsible for your muck-ups, okay? I'm just not. In order to get that bevel cut to match up with the other side, you have to switch the angle that you're cutting the miter shears and then do the same exact cut. It might not be a perfect, you know, match, which if you want to get fancy schmancy with it, grab some caulk, grab some spackling, smush it in where there's any gaps, or even chalk paint. If it's a tiny gap, that chalk paint will fill up some gaps, okay? I was not worrying about it for this project. I wanted it to look rustic anyway, so I just took some wood glue. I put it on half of our little piece of trim, and then I took some hot glue for the bottom piece of the trim. This way we got our immediate hold, so I could measure it in spot, or in its space, so it was even, and then I pressed it on down. Once I was done putting this little trim on our houses, I did notice there was some wood showing through with the trim, so I took some of that vanilla paint and just went right over it to cover that up. The Tim Holtz paste is super easy to work with. It's inexpensive, it's non-toxic. I really like this stuff, and it also blends well with colors. I mixed just a tiny amount up. A little bit goes a long way 90% of the time. Sometimes I wish I had a little bit more. And then I grabbed the painter's tape to tape our stencil down. You want to make sure that you do this whenever you're doing a raised stencil, or really any stencil, and cover any sections like I am here that you're worried about showing on your wood piece. So this way, just the design that you want shows up. But people, if I'm being real, sometimes, okay, the stencil's small and I can't fit painter's tape, so I will just like hold it down and pray. But it really does help with bleed through whether you're painting or doing a raised stencil. So if you can use painter's tape to hold your stencil in place, it's always a good idea. And people, look at that. It's so beautiful. I did the same exact thing, tape our little stencil down. And on this one, we're just going to use the little sleigh and the presents. I recommend waiting at least 24 hours before you pop a sealer on here. You could use some Mod Podge, poly, whatever makes you fuzzy inside. I'm probably just going to throw some Mod Podge on these. You can resell these. You can obviously keep them for your own home decor, give them as gifts, but they are absolutely stunning. If you're interested in more creative ways to DIY, check out this video right here. And as always, people, thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. And until next time, bye.